Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Inessa. I'm an indie author from Toronto, Canada, and I publish under the pen name Anne Sage. I write pretty much everything young adult and new adult, and I write fantasy, sci-fi, and a lot of paranormal mystery. If you're into listening to an author talk about her experience in the self-publishing world, because that is all I do, or hearing some of the tips and tricks that I have after publishing 15 books so far, then make sure that you are subscribed and you stick around to the end of the video and give it a thumbs up, because that really helps YouTube figure out that this is a channel for other authors and creatives. In today's video, we are talking about actually young adult books. I absolutely adore young adult books, and I love young adult tropes. So in today's video, we're talking about the top 5 young adult tropes that you can add into your books today to make them fit into the genre and to make your readers enjoy your books. Now, as a preface, you can use these tropes in not just young adult books, but these are heavily influenced in the YA space. And there's a lot more tropes than this, but these are just my top 5 that I don't think have, they probably have been overused. That's how a trope becomes a trope, is that other people use it, and there's quite a lot of it out there. So they are overused, but I don't think they're so overused that they are no longer relevant. I think these are the kind of evergreen tropes that you can write about in your YA books. Now, to get started, the first one that I want to talk about, and this is a big one. This is a big one in a lot of fantasy, not just young adult fantasy, but just fantasy in general. And that is the chosen one. So the chosen one is huge, right? Like every fantasy has the one person, being, creature, whatever it is, that is chosen for a specific task, something that they have to do that nobody else can do in the whole world, universe, planet, whatever you're writing. I love the chosen one trope. I think it's really fun. I think there's always a fresh new way to write about it. And I think when it's done right and when it's done well, it really makes you root for that character. A lot of movies have chosen ones as well. Some of our favorite movies would. A lot of our favorite books would. I mean, first one that comes to mind is obviously Lord of the Rings. Huge chosen one trope there, both book and movie. And I think that worked really well, because really you were rooting for this one person all the time. The entirety of the adventure, you were really hoping that they succeed. Now, with the chosen one, it's really important that when you're writing it, to write it well, that you don't make your chosen one just this flawless, unbelievable person. They have to have a lot of flaws, and they have to fail along the way. So just because they are the chosen one doesn't mean that they won't have obstacles. Sometimes those obstacles that they will overcome, but sometimes there are obstacles that they will not overcome, and not overcoming those obstacles will also teach them a lesson. I think it's really important when you're writing your chosen one that you think of them that way, that you don't think of them as this perfect person. Just because they were chosen for a certain task doesn't mean that they are just great at all the other tasks out there. And it doesn't even mean that they're going to be great at the task they were chosen for. So if you think about the legend of Excalibur and King Arthur, while Arthur was able to remove the sword from the rock, and he was the only one that could do it, he was the chosen one for that specific task. To actually wield the sword, he needed a lot of practice. And in all the stories, there's different interpretations of it. One really popular one is the help that he received from Merlin in order to be able to wield the sword properly. The whole "with great power comes great responsibility" comes to mind. And so you want to think of that when you're thinking about your chosen one, that nothing comes to them easy. If anything, you want to make things come to them a lot harder than you would for everybody else in your cast, because you want to make it believable that they were chosen, but they are not perfect. And that's the only way that that trope really works, and it works well. And I think that's the reason that it has stuck around so much, is because there's always different ways and different flaws and obstacles that you can throw at your main characters. at your chosen one. And that's kind of where you can differentiate yourself from the other ways that other authors use this trope. The second trope that we have is good versus evil. It's a trope as old as time, and not just in YA, but very much heavy in YA. And the reason it's very heavy in YA and also middle grade is because it's a lesson that we want to teach children and young adults and people who are still developing, right? That good will always overcome over evil. Now, the fun thing about this trope is you can actually switch it on its head. So any kind of villain that might be winning, if you're writing from the POV of a villain, a lot of the retellings that you hear about now, that you read now, and a few movies where the retelling, like if you look at Maleficent, for example, that's good versus evil, but basically flipped, right? So you're looking at maybe doing something different with good versus evil. But the general trope that exists for so long is that good will always overcome and win over evil. And again, the reason this trope works so well is because it's so open-ended. There's so much you can do. I mean, what does good versus evil really mean? It could be something as big as this gigantic battle that someone needs to overcome, like a big bad. It could be an internal battle too, the good versus evil in one character. I mean, you might be writing a character that has two different split personalities. Maybe that's their power, right? If it's a fantasy. Good versus evil if you're writing thrillers, mysteries, finding the murderer, right? A detective finding a murderer. That kind of thing. So there's so many ways that you can look at good versus evil, but it works specifically well in young adult novels. And the reason it works specifically well in young adult novels is because while intrinsically we all know that good needs to overcome evil for the world to kind of keep on turning, somebody who is a young adult, somebody who's still growing up and learning things, might not necessarily know it quite as well. They're still testing the boundaries. They're seeing what works. And so they're more easily swayed to the wrong side, to the evil side, than somebody who, say, is like 40 years old and already knows who they are deep down. And so the fun part of good versus evil is that it works so well with character arcs where you can actually see your character make mistakes, kind of tiptoe on the line and maybe even dip their toes in the evil side and then come back to the good side. And that's when good will persevere. So there's different ways to work on this trope as well. And that's, I think, is what makes it so interesting because it runs with your character arc so incredibly well, so much more so than some of the other tropes, I think. And speaking of the development of your character, the next trope that I think is a great trope to use in young adult novels is coming of age. Now, this trope can be used across all genres of young adult novels, like something like The Chosen One might be very specific to certain type of books, but coming of age, you can use it in anything. You can use it in young adult romance, fantasy, sci-fi, horror, anything. Coming of age and young adult, it's, hand in hand, peanut butter and jelly. Now I'm hungry, but that it just works. It's so perfect. It's made for each other. That's why this trope will always be around, just because it is made for young adult novels. You have a hero or heroine that are coming of age, they're becoming aware, they're learning about themselves, the arc. They are growing up as a person, they're discovering new things, and that really leads your entire plot. So it doesn't matter what the actual plot or subplot might be, that coming of age trope, that person growing up, going through the difficulties of life. Maybe they lose somebody they care about. Maybe their first love falls apart. All of these things that we experience as little adults becoming big adults, that's part of the coming of age trope. And when you're writing this, just think back to when you were younger, how everything felt so monumental, right? It's almost funny to think about now, but back when you were that age, when you're 16, 15, 14, 13, whatever, and you're coming of age, everything is so big and so important because your world really is very, very small. It only revolves around you and the few people that you know. You haven't done that much. You haven't experienced all that much. And so everything will be that much more important. And you want to think about that when you're writing coming of age. Coming of age, it doesn't have to be, the stakes don't have to be so great as they might be in the good versus evil trope. They might be very small because it's all about personal development. It's the growth of your main character. And the reason I love this trope so much is because the emphasis on that main character and their personal growth is so great. It makes your book, so much more relatable when you can truly nail those coming of age moments that are so small and so minuscule, but do so much for the character. So they might not, banish the big bad witch or something, or they might not necessarily save their school from an attack of some sort. But what they might get is their first job, and they might not fail at it. Or they might understand what it's like to love someone, but let them go for their sake. To not be selfish, right? Or how to be a better friend, how to be a better sister or brother. These small little things that they learn that might seem like just whatever in the scheme of those big battles and big books that are happening, those big plot lines. But in the coming of age trope, those small things are the biggest thing, just because they are the main plot that's driving your story. And since we kind of mentioned the love thing before, I think the number 4 trope that is amazing for YA books is first love. I mean, you can't write a young adult book without throwing that in there somewhere. I mean, you can, but there's so much opportunity to write that first love. And first love is fantastic in young adult novels. I absolutely love reading it. I love writing it. Everything is so exciting, right? They're not jaded yet. It's not, who's going to pay for dinner? Like, like, oh my God, like that kind of stuff. You're not worrying about what kind of work somebody does, getting to know them, like meeting their family, figuring out if you're going to have kids or get married. Like none of that stuff is relevant in a young adult novel. You care about fingertips brushing. You care about like looks across a room. You care about all that cute stuff that's so little, but if you write it well, can mean so much more than the biggest interaction that two people that are together could have. So just a single look can cause so much turmoil for a young adult person than it would for an adult. And I think that's fantastic. I think first love tropes are really fun to write because you can derail that love so easily, right? Miscommunication for young adults, for teens, for just young people is so easily made, not just in books, in real life. I remember myself and just queen of miscommunication, right? You don't say anything, but you assume everybody knows what you are thinking. And that is what a young adult is. And so the miscommunication for first loves, to write that, it's like a subtrope and a trope, really. And I think it's really great because you can really if you derail a first love trope in a young adult novel before you kind of figure it out and make them come back together, it is so much more painful because, again, that coming of age situation where everything is just so much more monumental and big, right? And then the final trope, also on the love theme, and this one is very big in young adult novels, and that is the love triangle. So I think the love triangle kind of works, again, in almost every genre. And it kind of goes into like all the other tropes we talked about, where you have the one person in the middle of two different people. So the chosen one and two different people. You have the good versus evil, where you have to decide. But before you decide, ultimately, you're usually playing and trying to see which one you like better, which is not a nice thing to do. So that's the evil side, maybe. A lot of times the other two people don't know each other, and if they do know about each other, then they are not good with it. There's the coming of age that plays into it, of course, because they're just discovering on like what they like better. More often than not, the love interests in the love triangle will be complete polar opposites of one another. And then the first love, right? That's also a part of it. So the love triangle is great. It's used a lot in YA fantasy, a lot. I don't think it's overdone. I think it's a really fun and interesting kind of B plot that you might want to add into your books, like a B story of sorts. And if you think about Save the Cat beats, more often than not, if there's a love triangle, the B story will be the love triangle. So I just think it's like a fun little, like it could be the full plot, but it could also be the subplot. And so I think adding the love triangle trope into your YA novels will more often than not, if you do it right, will more often than not kind of give you more quirkiness in a way, and just something else for the readers to kind of hang on to outside of the main plot. Now, the love triangle could be the main plot, like especially if you're writing like a YA romance. That love triangle very often would be the main plot, but it's still, I feel like if you have a love triangle, the main story would be the love story of two people, and then the love triangle is like this cog in the wheel, right? That is not necessarily supposed to be there. So maybe it's just something that gets in the way, and it's something for your hero or heroine to overcome, to figure out exactly what they want. And in order to figure out what they want and who they want, they have to figure out who they are. So again, the love triangle plays back on character arcs, which is why I love it. So I think those are my top 5. Anytime. I think I've had these top 5 tropes in YA. I've considered them the top 5 for years and years now. And the reason they've always stuck around, because I think they always work. And I think there's always ways to refresh these top tropes that they're not going to get like overly done. So yeah. If you're writing young adult, or even if you're not, these could work very well in any other novel as well, like I said before. But if you are writing young adult, consider using some of these tropes in your novel. Maybe not all of them, pick 1 or 2, but not all of them. But consider using some of them, because I think they are fantastic to help you kind of get the plot going and make it a bit more interesting and give more depth to your writing. So I hope you enjoyed this video today. If you did, let me know what your favorite young adult tropes are, or just what your favorite tropes are. If you want to talk about that, let me know what they are. Then make sure you comment below and tell me, especially if they're different from the ones that I've listed. I'd love to know what tropes that you love to read, what tropes you like to write. It doesn't have to be in books, actually. Even if you have like tropes you enjoy in movies, then I'd love to hear about that too. And as always, I hope you have a great rest of the week and that you stay magical. And I will see you next week for another video. Bye!